Welcome to the debate. Today we're tackling a pretty frustrating reality. Humans have this incredibly sophisticated biological tool, the brain, and yet we seem completely incapable of using it correctly. So the big question is why? Are we failing to evolve because the social matrix, our schools, our jobs, our whole culture is designed to stunt us? Or is the problem, as I think you'll suggest, more of a failure of personal will? And for my part, I'm arguing that the system itself is what's actively blocking our evolution.
And I see where you're going with that, I do. But I come at it from a different angle. I really don't think we can blame the architecture of society for for a failure of the operator. I believe the core issue isn't all the external noise, but our internal inability to tune a radio. We're confusing our loud, anxious, conscious mind with what the material calls clean internal communication. We have absolute free will, and claiming the system is stopping us is actually just us choosing to play the victim.
Okay, but let's look at the how of that failure. The material on cognitive evolution makes a diagnosis that feels painfully real. We just don't know how to use the brain. It says this dysfunction is proportional to the growth of the so-called social matrix. I mean, think about our educational system. It doesn't teach you to connect with other beings or expand your consciousness. It teaches you logistical goals. It teaches you to get an A, get the degree, hit the KPI. We're training the brain to be a storage drive for facts, not an antenna for connection. That's not user error. That's bad design.
I get that. The pressure to perform is real. We all felt it. But I'm not convinced that bad design is an excuse for bad usage. I mean, look at the sovereignty of choice. It frames the law of free will as absolute. It says very clearly, not making a choice is actually making a choice. So when we sit around paralyzed by those logistical goals you hate, we are actively deciding to let them rule us. The material suggests this life, this incarnation, is a tool for learning. So if the school system is hard, maybe that's just the curriculum we need to master, not some wall meant to stop us.
That's a fair point, but I think you're underestimating the sheer weight of that curriculum. You're asking people to swim upstream against a current that's frankly designed to push them down. The cognitive evolution text argues that true evolution requires a confrontation of our learning. And that means we have to unlearn the idea that success equals external validation. If the brain is occupied 24/7 with navigating the matrix, paying bills, worrying about status, it physically cannot engage in the psychic development needed to evolve. We aren't just making lazy choices, we are exhausted by a system that demands the wrong things from us.
See, this is where we need to be precise about what we mean. You're talking about the brain being occupied, but occupied by what exactly? The material draws a sharp line between the conscious mind and internal communication. The conscious mind is the part of you stressing about bills and status. It's heavy, it's burdened. But internal communication is described as clean. It's a signal free of all that noise. So using the brain correctly doesn't mean changing society. It means doing the very hard work of filtering out the static so you can actually hear the music.
I love that analogy, but isn't the static being broadcast by the very society I'm criticizing? It's hard to tune into a clear signal when you're standing next to a loudspeaker. If we don't address the source of the interference, the way we're conditioned to value the wrong things, most people will never even know that clean channel exists. We are failing to decide correctly because our definition of a correct decision has been corrupted. We think a correct decision is one that makes us money, not one that evolves our being.
That is a compelling point, but what if that loudspeaker is actually internal? The text calls these the additional burdens of being human. They're part of the interface. Evolution isn't about smashing the loudspeaker, it's about recognizing you don't actually have to listen to it. When you say the matrix corrupts our decisions, you're essentially saying we have no agency. But if we accept that freedom of choice exists in every single nanosecond, then evolution is the moment you realize, okay, I am feeling pressure, but I can choose to act from a place of clarity anyway.
I think we're circling the same problem, just from different sides. You call it agency, I'm calling it systemic atrophy. If you don't use a muscle, it withers. And my worry is that by focusing so heavily on just logistical survival, We've atrophied the part of the brain responsible for that high-level, clean decision-making. We're failing to use the tool because we've forgotten what the tool is actually for.
And I would just counter that the muscle never disappears. We just forget to flex it. The failure to use the brain correctly is a failure of attention. We just let the conscious mind run on autopilot. The fix is to stop, recognize the difference between the noise and the signal, and take responsibility for the fact that even hesitation is a choice we're actively making.
So, to pull this together, I maintain that to truly evolve, we have to stop treating the brain like a checklist machine. We need to actively reject the logistical goals of the social matrix and prioritize developing our deeper potentials.
And I'd conclude that evolution is an inside job. It's about distinguishing the noisy, burdened conscious mind from that clean internal communication, and then realizing that you're always in the driver's seat, whether you like the road you're on or not.
The difference between blaming the map and learning how to navigate.
Exactly. The tool is right there in your head. It's up to you to turn it on.
Thank you for listening to The Debate.